I'm very happy to stand here and talk for hours about access. I've been an access officer for 20 years and the whole issue has moved on substantially in those 20 years, from arguing vociferously for one wheelchair accessible toilet in an office building in the city to today actually really working on inclusive design in the way that Dan's just been expressing. So it's actually been a very exciting 20 years actually, and the work's not finished. Because the whole inclusive design agenda, I think, has come up from the disability lobby saying we're fed up with being unable to go about our daily lives in the way everybody else can, and we want easy access, we want it convenient, and we want it safe and secure and comfortable and with dignity, the same way as everybody else wants to move around the environment. And what we used to do is tag it on to the end after we'd designed the building or designed the public space. Today, what we're really trying to do, and what I've been trying to do with the policies and the standards and the guidance at the GLA, is put that up front, right at the very beginning. So you think about those issues and needs right at the very beginning. And by thinking about older people, about children, about women, about people with different religions and faith groups and people of sexual orientation, all of everybody's needs, which actually, is all of us. If you think about the needs of people right at the very beginning, we can design much nicer spaces. And I think the spaces that we see now in London are getting much better and much more comfortable, much nicer places to be. But it still doesn't work, which is why I'm still doing my job. And I think the slide we've got here at the moment, a fantastic place to work. I love working in City Hall. But actually, it's still not terribly accessible. There are some issues around the wayfinding, how you find your way there. When you get in, it's quite a tight, confined front door. It's revolving doors unless you find the side door that's automatic. So, and there's ramped access down to the lower ground floor cafe. There's no easy, quick staircase. You have to wait for the lift or use a very long ramp. So there are all sorts of issues, even with City Hall, that does comply with all our current standards. So even though the world is much, much more accessible than it was 20 years ago, we still haven't got there yet. And I think the whole inclusive design agenda is helping us to move that forward. What I was asked to do today was talk about the policy, talk about what we're doing at the GLA with the London Plan and our standards and guidance, and how that fits in with the whole debate around accessible housing and the confusion still, I believe, around lifetime homes, wheelchair housing, general needs housing, extra care homes. What are all these different names? What do they all mean? And here you are, the poor old planning case officer, trying to work out whether to grant planning permission or not. Can I just ask, how many DC officers have we got here today? Is a good handful. And how many planning policy officers? There's 1, 2, 3. Okay. And how many designers? Just 1, 2, 3. Okay. So we've got a good mix actually. So hopefully this will answer what you want to know. And if it doesn't, then please tell us, because that's what we want to hear about. So I'll start off with the existing London Plan. 2004 it was published. I started working at the GLA in 2002, writing the policies and producing the guidance that goes with it. It was updated in 2008, but I have to say the access policies were more or less the same. We just tweaked it a little bit because CABE had produced their guidance document on inclusive design principles, which was very helpful. And I've got loads of brochures and stuff with me today, so afterwards if you want to come and have a chat, I've got CABE's inclusive design principles document. But our main overarching cross-cutting policy in the current London Plan on inclusive design is policy 4B5. And by the way, you don't have to scribble, well you can scribble if you want, but we are going to put all of these slides up onto the website, so you will have access to them, so you don't need to write it all down. Or of course you can go and read the London Plan where you'll find it, which is on the GLA website. But what we aim to do is get away from this, well, I only need to think about access right at the end. Part M of the building regulations, it's not a planning issue, it's a building control issue. As long as there's a ramp to the front door, it'll be fine. So you go through the whole design process, go to building control, they say it's not very accessible, you bung some nasty bit of access stuff. What we're saying is no, we don't want minimum standards. Part M of the building regulations are very minimum. They don't create an inclusive environment. We want it up front, designed in right at the very beginning, and the highest standards, not the minimum standards. And the way to do that is by boroughs in London adopting an inclusive design approach when they're writing their policies. And the way of the checking mechanism, which now the government has made a requirement through the Town Country Planning Act, is producing access statements. So I was quite pleased when we wrote that in 2004. It wasn't in the Act and now it is. But just a reiteration of what actually inclusive design is. It's about creating an environment where we all feel comfortable, where we can all use the buildings and the public spaces safely. Key thing for me, which is very important for disabled people, is independence and not having to go and ask to, get the key to use the toilet, or can I, the revolving door is locked, the side door is locked and you're telling me to use the revolving door, please unlock the door. You want to be able to use it independently without any effort, without being treated differently, or you don't want to keep being reminded all the time that you're elderly or you can't manage or you're disabled or whatever. Flexibility, and I think flexibility is a key issue in sustainability. The whole approach to the way we use resources, etc. We want to be able to change and adapt easily, and that's a key thing about inclusive design. We're not all the same. We all use buildings very, very differently, so we need to take account of people's different needs and design that in, and not say, oh well, there's only a few of you, so we're not going to bother about designing for you. And people are different and people's expectations are different, and you may have to provide different solutions for different people. Housing, which is what we're here for today, so as well as that overarching cross-cutting policy which we've got in Chapter 4 in the London Plan, I included specific policy around accessible housing, which I didn't think in 2004 was terribly innovative, because Lifetime Home Standards has been around since 1991. Lots of people were designing to it anyway. Lots of boroughs in London were already including that as policy. But we did have a big debate at the examination in public about Lifetime Home Standards and wheelchair standards. But the inspector supported it. He said there's a shortage of accessible housing in London. Only 1% of our housing stock is replaced with new housing each year. So most people continue to live in existing housing that's been built 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 or more years ago and is not very accessible. So it's very important that all our new stock is actually designed to those inclusive design principles, and Lifetime Homes, and Anne's going to go through it in detail, exactly what the Lifetime Home Standards mean and what they are. But of course, if you use a wheelchair inside your home, you do need more space. You need a larger bathroom, you need particular facilities in your kitchen, etc. So we did put in this 10% specifically around wheelchair accessible housing, and I'll come back to that because I think there's probably a debate about the difference between that. There are other policies in the London Plan around access for disabled people, particularly for older people, for children, etc. But I won't go into all of those in detail because we'll be here all day. But if anybody wants to know more about our existing policies that are specific to creating an inclusive society, then I'm very happy to talk about that later. How do we implement the London Plan? Obviously it's through the boroughs, working in partnership with the boroughs, working through our planning decisions unit, making sure that your development plan documents in the boroughs comply and conform to the London Plan. So those policies around access should all be in the local plans as well. But we at GLA want to help you do that effectively, so we have produced supplementary planning guidance. I've got, and I didn't bring it with me actually, there's a slide showing it in a minute, but I did produce SPG in 2004. We will be updating that with the new work going on at the moment, with the new administration, with the new London Plan. We also did some case study examples. I've produced best practice guidance on wheelchair housing. All that's on our website. And I'm conscious that some of that now does need updating, because 2004 is a lot has happened, which you'll see as I proceed with my talk. We also now do pre-app advice, so I go to pre-app meetings and try to explain and articulate those policies at pre-application stage when there's still time for schemes to be amended and altered, and explain more about what you can put into your access statement, and how you can articulate how you've made the scheme accessible and inclusive. And we have now started to monitor, our annual monitoring report only monitors the key, really high level, very high level strategic issues in London, but we are now monitoring Lifetime Homes, which I'm very pleased about, although it's tricky and some of you may have some questions about that. because you need to gather so much information at the planning application stage. But our London Development Database is now collecting stats on Lifetime homes as well. And this slide just shows the brochures that we produced back in 2004, which, as I say, we will be updating now with the new work we're doing on the London plan at the moment. The SPG reinforces that message. It explains more information, provides more detail. It signposts to technical advice and information. And on Lifetime Homes, it explains that we're applying that policy across the board to all new housing, whether it's conversions of refurbishments of existing blocks of flats, single homes, whatever. You know, if you're submitting a planning application, then you should try and meet those Lifetime Home standards. And it's across social housing and the private sector as well, as is the wheelchair housing 10% policy. And we produced this guidance, this best practice guidance, in 2007 because there was still a lot of debate about what's the difference between Lifetime homes and wheelchair housing. And what I tried to do in this best practice guide is pick out the key features of wheelchair accessible housing that you would need to look at a planning application stage. So if you're a planner, I've got Habinteg's Wheelchair Housing Design Guide, thick document, and really it's designed for housing associations and their surveyors and designers. So it tells you about sockets and kitchen kettles and showers and you know, real detailed stuff. Well, obviously as a planner, you haven't, you know, you can't control a lot of that, and a lot of it's not relevant to you. So what I tried to do with this best practice guide is to pick out those elements of wheelchair accessible housing that you do need to assess at planning application stage. And hopefully that provides more information. And then what you can do is you can check whether and the onus is on the developer as well. I mean, the poor old DC officer, and I have worked in DC and I know what it's like. You feel you haven't got time to assess all these things. Well, that's what the access statement is for. It's the developer is telling you that they have met these principles and they have designed to meet those standards. And the easiest way, I think, is to get them to include in their access statement how they've actually met those standards. And I am now getting, on the strategic applications at the GLA, checklists that actually go through the 16 Lifetime Home standards and demonstrate with typical flat layouts how they've achieved that. And the same with the wheelchair housing. And that's the best sort of access statement, because I know then that the applicant has understood what the standards are about, and it does help them to design a better scheme if they've actually done that assessment at that very early stage. The policy and the boroughs were putting it in their development plans. A lot of access officers particularly, and some disabled people coming to us saying, but there's a new development and it still doesn't seem to be meeting the Lifetime Home standards, and you know, what can you do about that? So we commissioned Savills to do a report for us, which is also on our website. They did some desktop research. They went out and they talked to some of you in the boroughs. They assessed some actual built schemes, planning permission schemes, and they made various recommendations about how we can improve the policy, how we can improve the information that we provide, and one of the key things was monitoring. And so I'm taking that into account now, I hope, with the work that we're doing on the review of the London plan and the advice and information that we're giving there. So, new administration, new London plan, very exciting stuff, and we're all busy working away at the moment on the new plan. We issued this Planning for a Better London last July, so that set out the direction that the new mayor was going in London. And we have recently produced this, what we call the Statement of Intent, the proposals for the new London plan, which is a formal part of the planning process that we have to go through, which we have produced this for the Assembly, the London Assembly. That's out for consultation now, although it's not really for public consultation, it is for consultation with the Assembly, but we do publish it and anybody is allowed to comment. So you are very, very welcome to comment on that. And then we spend the next couple of months actually producing the actual document, the full London plan, which will come out for consultation in the autumn. The Mayor's vision, and it's up till 2031, so it's quite a long-term plan, obviously. And we want to make sure that London excels amongst world cities, achieves the highest environmental standards and quality of life. Quality of life is very important, and wants to lead the world in in its approach to tackling urban challenges of the 21st century. And then it sets out 6 objectives. I've just pulled out 3 here, which I think actually reinforce the inclusive design and the social inclusion agenda. It's about creating a city with diverse, strong, secure and accessible neighbourhoods, and we're doing a lot of work around neighbourhoods as well. A city that delights the eye. The Mayor's very keen on making sure that the new build schemes are very beautiful and look and, you know, are worthy of a world city, but also ensuring that we improve Londoners' health, welfare and development. And we want a city where it's easy, safe and convenient for everyone to access jobs, opportunities and facilities. So I mean, there are good inclusive design principles right in there, right at the very top, that we want everybody to feel comfortable and to love and want to be in London. You can look at that on our website, and I've put the web address up there. So we're now looking at how we're actually going to review the London plan, and we've made some commitments in that document about how we're going to move forward reviewing the plan. And the Mayor has reinforced and confirmed that he wants us to look at housing for older and disabled people and student accommodation, and strengthen the promotion of lifetime homes and wheelchair accessible housing in all new developments. We want to protect and enhance social infrastructure. It's all very well having lots of new homes, but actually we need the social infrastructure to support those homes and to ensure that we have community facilities and amenities in the vicinity of those new homes. And we want the spaces and the buildings to work for all Londoners at all stages of their lives, which again I think is a good principle of lifetime homes. It's not just about older people or disabled people, it's about all of us to be able to be flexible and adaptable throughout our changing needs. And we've reinforced the original London Plan policy 4B5, meeting the highest standards of access and inclusive design. So what I think is really interesting is that we've had that debate and that policy around access for disabled people that's moved on to an inclusive design approach, and now it's moving into a much broader social inclusion approach. And actually, if we see what's been happening outside of my immediate area of access and disability issues in the broader sense, a lot has happened in the last 4 or 5 years. And one of the very exciting things for me is that the Mayor has, through the housing strategy work, is about to publish in July next month the Housing Design Guide, which has mainstreamed the Lifetime Home standards. And it's also set out some space standards. And although it's not published yet, Esther has managed to get some extracts from that document, which we're going to talk about later on. So, but what the Housing Design Guide is doing is pulling together all of the standards that are out there already. It's working with the Homes and Communities Agency, which I think eventually will adopt those standards as well if they go through. So that's going to come out in July as a draft for consultation. And the aim is that it will then link up to the Housing Communities Agency's funding for 2011. So any housing association applying for funding for the 2011 round, if this all goes through and it all gets approved, will need to comply with those standards. And it's around, not just around internal space standards within a home, it's actually about place shaping in the public realm, housing typologies, the sorts of homes we want to see in London, and reinforcing that we need privacy and security and all of those things, and they pull that together in one document, which links through, I think, very neatly to the work that Kay's been doing on Building for Life. I have to say I'm not an expert on Building for Life. Esther is, so Esther can deal with any questions on that. But again, what that is doing is promoting good, accessible and socially cohesive communities and neighbourhoods. And there are, I think, Urban Design London do run some courses on Building for Life, and it reinforces that we're talking about character, about the pedestrian and street environment, about design and construction, and the environment and community. And I've just picked out some of the key issues for Building for Life there as well. And of course, Lifetime Home standards are part of that in the design and construction bit about internal spaces and layout. Does it allow for adaptation, conversion or extension? So the Lifetime Home issue comes back up there. The Lifetime Homes standards have been formally adopted by the government in the Code for Sustainable Homes. If you look at the technical guide for Code for Sustainable Homes issued last March 2007, it's 2 years old now, isn't it? In the health and well-being section, there's a whole section on daylighting, on sound insulation, on the provision of private space, and the 16 Lifetime Home standards. And you get points for all of those things. And we are seeing schemes coming into the GLA at code level 3 and 4 that have confirmed, yes, they are going to meet all of the Lifetime Home standards. So that's really helpful, because as well as the planning policy, and we can implement it through the planning process, it's also being implemented through the Sustainable Homes code. And of course the government has got requirements coming in for that as well over time. The other standard that I think has been really useful, although there's still some discussion and debate about it because it is a draft, is the British Standard Institution was asked to look at the Lifetime Home standards, and I think that goes with the government when they were looking at Code for Sustainable Homes, looking at how well we were designing homes that met all of those principles and aims and objectives. And one of the ways, obviously, that a lot, particularly in the access world, we know that once you get a building regulation, even though it's a minimum standard, it does help to actually move the debate forward, because a certain amount of accessibility is automatically built in because of that building regulation, because you have really got that enforcement is much more effective at Building Act stage. And so we were saying that if they could introduce the Lifetime Home standards as a building regulation, and when we produced the London Plan in 2004, there was a hint that that was going to happen, but they then chose to put it through the Code for Sustainable Homes approach. But in fact, they're still thinking about that, and the Lifetime Neighbourhoods document, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, actually did commit to the government reviewing how effectively Lifetime Home standards were being implemented in the country. And they tasked British Standards Institution to look at those standards and to see how, I mean, in a way, it was how easily they could then be translated into a regulation. So they've issued this draft for development, what they call a draft for development, DD 266, and it takes the Lifetime Home standards, the 16 standards, and I was very keen that it actually also incorporated explanations about applying those standards to high density housing, because of course obviously what we see mostly in the GLA is blocks of flats, high density, lots of flats. And how easy is it to then apply the Lifetime Home standards? I think it's very easy to do it. I think it's probably easier in a block of flats than it is in terraced housing in York, which is where the Lifetime Joseph Rowntree standards, foundation standards started life. But a lot of people were confused about the parking standards and all of that. So DD 266 looks at that. And it also looks at some of the wheelchair accessibility issues and incorporates that into DD 266. And they've committed to review that within 2 years, which is the end of this year. And if they do convert it, well, it depends on the responses. So if you've got some comments about that DD, then please do write to BSI, because they will be setting up another task group to look at the responses they've got, including from government. And the Building Regulations Advisory Committee has just spent the last 6 months looking at it and is about to write to BSI with their comments on it. So hopefully that will get turned into a full British standards, which will reinforce those Lifetime Home standards and makes it easier then for architects and designers, I think, to implement them. And we've been pushing on the BSI committee to get them to look at a standard for wheelchair accessible housing, because there are some differences. People do need more space, and looking at Habente's guide or the GLA best practice guide, how much of that could actually be built into a British standard. So BSI have just set up a task group to look at that. BSI move very slowly, so it'll probably be another 2 years before we see anything on that, but at least they've started. And then taking those Lifetime Home standards and those wheelchair standards and those inclusive design principles out beyond the front door of your home, out into the street. I was very pleased when the CLG last year produced their Lifetime Neighbourhoods document, very much about housing for an ageing society. We all think that means for older people. It doesn't. We're all ageing. I'm a day older than I was yesterday, and I'll be a day older tomorrow. So it's about the fact that we are all ageing, we are all getting older, and there will be a lot more older people around over the next 20, 30 years. and how are we going to ensure that our neighbourhoods are accessible, welcoming, inviting, regardless of how old you are, whether you've got any ill health or an impairment. And they talk about how to actually ensure that our neighbourhoods are accessible in that sense. And they've used the lifetime home concept in that document, which reinforces it as well, and which is where they commit to ensuring that those standards are actually implemented through the Housing Community Agency or through the building regulations or through planning acts, and that's what they're, as I say, that's what they're considering at the moment. Now, this initiative's been picked up by the Older People's Lobby, and Help the Aged, I think, has helpfully produced a booklet called Towards Common Ground, a manifesto for lifetime neighbourhoods, because a lot of people say, well, what is a lifetime neighbourhood? You know, is it somewhere where you spend your whole life? I don't, you know, people move regularly, especially in London. I don't want to sit in the same street for 50 years, although some people do, and that's fine if they want to. But it's saying whatever stage of life you're at, you should feel comfortable and safe and secure in your neighbourhood. And what does that mean? So they've set out this 10-point manifesto that says actually all residential neighbourhoods should have basic amenities within reach. The streets should be safe, secure and clean. There should be realistic transport options for all. Public seating is something for a lot of people who need to stop regularly. It doesn't matter whether you're with small children or if you're elderly. Having regular seating means that you can walk further. Information and advice about the facilities that are available. Obviously, lifetime home standards, implementing them in new and refurbished schemes, and listening to people. I mean, I still work through our London Access Forum, through local access groups, and I think disabled people in particular find it very difficult sometimes to get their voices heard, and for their local access groups to be recognised and involved in the system. The GLA works through LOPSIG, the London Older People Strategy Group, which organises events with a lot of older people's organisations regularly. So, and there will be one in every borough, so you can hear older people's voices as well as disabled people's voices through that route. Places to meet and spend time. I think a lot of designers forget about the fact that you actually need a community space, and not necessarily a hall or something, but there's all sorts of different ways of doing that. And there's some nice extra care housing schemes that I've seen where, you know, the flats are upstairs and downstairs is the cafe and a little square and the Shrubadist and the health centre, and they're all mixed in together, and the older people are upstairs and mixing with the local community when they go to the hairdresser or into the cafe or whatever, and they're a good place to meet and spend time, and everybody, regardless of where you are in your life, stage of your life, feels comfortable there. Pavements in good repair and public toilets. Public toilets is a huge issue for a lot of people, which I think we personally think we need to do a bit more about. So where does that take us? You know, if you think about all those different standards, those guidance, the work that's happening through the disability lobby, through the older people's lobby, through the government's actions around housing, through the housing design guide that the Housing Corporation, Housing Communities Agency are promoting, the work we can do through the Planning Act, through the London Plan. You know, what will the future home look like? Will we still need special needs provision for disabled people? You know, the disabled people live in the bungalow with the carport, and there's a big flashing sign outside saying I'm a wheelchair user. Or will we be able to design homes that are inclusive, where we all have the same sort of choice to live in the homes that are being built, because they're flexible and they're adaptable, they're spacious, they suit a variety of diverse needs. And if we can do that, we will reduce the cost to society of doing adaptations. People won't be stuck in hospital because they can't move home, because their home isn't accessible, because it will be basically accessible. And it gives us all a lot more choice and dignity and independence. And I hope that's where we can get to, and then I can retire. There's lots and lots of information, so there's a few websites there. And that's the end of my talk. So.